Here we go with Watership down. And here's the box set. Got all the way from Korea, believe it or not. This is the British TV series. All the way from Korea. It took me forever to get this when it's available. Forever.
Yep.
And no, it was not from 20 years ago, I don't think. If you actually want to look, let's take a look when.
On the bottom.
I can't be on the bottom. Well, maybe. We'll see on the bottom. Single layer, Korean, 2013.
11 years ago?
2013 is when the series came out. Or well, actually when I got this. 2013. So, it has all the characters from Watership down. This is the more mellower version of the book, actually. Because it's more of a kid's show, so it does not show the violence and everything like that from the original movie.
I read you, Commander. Moving out.
And here is Blackberry. I'm going to show it to the camera. Here's Blackberry. This is a doe, female rabbit, that went with the group. The book has Blackberry as a buck. So, was this a woke moment?
No, I call it a modernization. I don't think it was a woke moment. I would call it a modernization because they probably realized in the original group it was all boys.
Yep, and they had to go find girls.
Yeah. And since it's a children's show, do they really want to do the birds and the bees thing in that fashion?
Did the TV show, did we ever see Blackberry in the end with kids?
Yeah. They just don't say who.
By who, right.
Yeah.
That's... Yeah, okay. Anyway.
If the adventure team is actually boys and girls, they dodge an uncomfortable aspect of the story, which is...
Well, where'd they get the girls, Dad?
Yeah.
But
How did they get girls?
But the story says how they got them. The hutch rabbits and...
Yeah, but that show bypassed all that. They were all wild rabbits.
Ah.
There's certain aspects that you just bypass.
Yeah, of course. You lose the flavor in a lot of ways. Okay, episode 12, The Stranger in the Field. We're doing a read-along of Watership Down. But here's a little something from R.M. Lockley on a book called The Private Life of the Rabbit. Nevertheless, even in Crowded Warren, visitors in the form of young rabbits seeking a desirable dry quarters may be tolerated. And if powerful enough, they may obtain and hold a place.
Affirmative, Commander.
To come to the end of a time of anxiety and fear. To feel that cloud that hung over us lift and disperse. The cloud was dulled the heart and made happiness no more than a memory. This, at least, is one joy that must be known by almost every living creature. Here is a boy who was waiting to be punished. But then, unexpectedly, he finds that his faults has been overlooked or forgotten. And at once, the world reappears in brilliant colors, full of delightful prospects. What? I never felt that when I was going to get an ass kicking or not. You're always in fear of your parents whipping your ass later on.
But that's the thing. That person is expecting that. Then it doesn't happen.
But what happens later on if he does get his ass beat?
Or something else.
Okay. Here,
He dodged it at that moment.
here is a soldier who was waiting with a heavy heart to suffer and die in battle. But suddenly the luck has changed. There is news. The war is over, and everyone burst out singing. He will go home after all. The sparrows in the plowland were crouching in terror of the kestrel. But she was gone, and they fly pell-mell up the hedgerow, frisking, chattering, and perching where they will. The bitter winter had all the country in its grip. The hares on the down, stupid and torrid with cold, were resigned to sinking further and further into the freezing heart of the snow in silence. But now, who would have dreamed of it? The thaw is trickling, and the great tit is ringing his bell from the top of the bare lime tree. The earth is scented, and the hares bound and skip in the warm wind. Hopelessness and reluctance are blown away like a fog in the dumb certitude where they crept, a place of desolate as a crack in the ground opens like a road and stretches to the hills in the sky. The tired rabbits fed and basked in the sunny meadow as though they had come no further than from the bank at the edge of the nearby copse. The heather and the stumbling darkness were forgotten, as though the sunrise had melted them. Bigwig and Hawkbit chased each other over through the long grass. Speedwell jumped over the little brook and ran down the middle of the field, and then Acorn tried to follow and fell short. Silver joked with him as he scrambled out and rolled in a patch of dead oak leaves until he was dry. As the sun rose higher, shortening of the shadows and drawing the dew from the grass, most of the rabbits came wandering back to the sun-flecked shade amongst the cow parsley among the edge of the ditch. Here, Hazel and Fiber were sitting with Dandelion under a flowering wild cherry. The wild petals spun around them, covering the grass and speckling their fur, while 30 feet above a thresher sang, "Cherry-doo, cherry-doo, needip, needip, needip." "Well, this is a fine place, all right, isn't it, Hazel?" said Dandelion lazily. "I suppose we'd better start having a look along these banks soon, although I must say I'm in no particular hurry. But I've got an idea. It may be going to rain before much longer." Fiber looked as though he was about to speak, but then shook his ears and turned to nibbling at a dandelion. "That looks like a good bank, along the edge of the trees up there," answered Hazel. "What do you say, Fiber? Shall we go up there now, and shall we wait a bit longer?" Fiber hesitated and then replied, "Just as you think, Hazel." "Well, there's no need to do any serious digging, is there?" said Bigwig. "That sort of thing's all right for does, but not for us." "Still, we better make one or two scrapes, don't you think?" said Hazel. "Something to give us shelter at a pinch. Let's go up to the copse and look around. We might as well take our time and make sure that we were like to have them. I don't want to have to work twice." "Yes, that's the style," said Bigwig. "And while you're doing that, I'll take Silver and Buckthorn here and have a look down the fields beyond, just to get the lie of the land and make sure there isn't anything dangerous." The three explorers set off beside the brook, while Hazel led the other rabbits across the field and up to the edge of the woodland. They went slowly along the foot of the bank, pushing in and out of the clumps of red champion and ragged robin. From time to time, one or the other would begin to scrape in the gravelly bank or venture a little way amongst the trees and the nut bushes to scuffle in the leaf mold. After they'd been searching and moving on quietly for some time, they reached a place from which they could see that the field below them broadened out, both on their own side and the opposite. The wood edge curved upwards away from the brook. There they noticed roofs of a farm in some distance off. Hazel stopped and they gathered around him. I don't think it makes much sense. We go where we do a bit of scratching, he said. It's all good, but far as I can see, not the slightest trace of ill. No scents or tracks or droppings. That seems unusual. But it may be just that the home worn attracted more ill than other places. Anyway, we ought to do well here now. I'll tell you what it seems the right thing to me. Let's go back a little way between the woods and have a scratch near that oak tree there, just by that white patch of stitchwork. I know the farm's a long way off, but there's no point in being nearer to it than we need. And if we're fairly close to the wood opposite, the trees will help break the wind a bit in winter. Splendid, says Blackberry. It's going to cloud over, do you see? Rain before sunset, and we'll be in shelter. Well, let's make a start. Oh, look! There's Bigwig coming back along the bottom, and the other two with him. The three rabbits returned down the bank of the stream and had not yet seen Hazel or the others. They passed below them in the narrow part of the field between the two copses, and it was not until Acorn has been sent halfway down the slope to attract their attention that they turned and came up the ditch. I don't think there's going to be much trouble as us here, Hazel, Bigwig said. The farm is a good way away, and the fields between don't show any signs of a ill at all. There's a man track, in fact. There are several, but they look as though they were used a good deal. The scent's fresh, and here are the ends of those little white sticks that they burn in their mouths. But that's all for the best, I reckon. We'll keep away from the men, and the men frighten the ill away. Why do you think the men come, you suppose? Asked Fiber. Who knows why men do anything? They may drive cows, sheep in the fields, cut wood in the copses. What does it matter? It's a matter of dodging, and I'd rather dodge a man than a stoat or a fox. Well, that's fine, says Hazel. You've found out a lot, Bigwig, and all is for the good. We can just go to make some scrapes along the bank here. We better start. The rain won't be long now, and I'd know anything about it. Buck rabbits on their own seldom or never go in for serious digging. This is the natural job of a doe, making a home for her litter before they are born. And then her buck helps her. All the same, the solitary bucks, if they can't find no existing holes, make use of, will sometimes stretch out short tunnels for a shelter. Although it's not the work that they tackle at all seriously. During the morning, digging proceeded a light-hearted, intermittent way. The bank on each side of the oak tree was bare and consisted of lightly graveled soil. There are several false starts and fresh choices. By 9/5, They had 3 scrapes of a sort. Hazel, watching, lent a hand here and there and encouraged the others. Every so often, he'd slip back, look over the field, and make sure all is safe. Only Fiver remained solitary. He took no part in the digging, but squatted on the edge of the ditch, fidgeting back and forth, sometimes nibbling and then startling up suddenly as though he could hear some sound in the woods. After speaking to him once or twice, received no reply, Hazel thought it was best to let him alone. The next time he left the digging, he crept away from Fiver and sat on the bank as though entirely concerned with the work. Yeah, freaking Fiver, dude, jeez. After a while, after 9 trip, the sky clouded over thickly. The light grew dull, and you could smell rain approaching from the west. A blue tit has been swinging on a bramble, singing, "Hi-oh, go and get another bit of moss," and stopped his acrobatics and flew into the wood. Hazel was just wondering whether it would be worthwhile starting a side passage to link Bigwig's hole to Dandelion's, when he felt a stamp of warning from somewhere close by. He turned quickly. It was Fiver who had stamped, and he was now staring intently across the field. Besides a tussock of grass a little way off in the outside opposite cote, a rabbit was sitting and gazing at them, its ears erect, and eventually have given them the full attention of sight, smell, and hearing. Hazel rose on his hind legs and paused, and then sat back on his haunches in full view. The other rabbits remained motionless. Hazel, never taking his eyes off, heard 3 or 4 of the others come up behind him. After a moment, he said, "Blackberry?" "He's down in the hole," replied Pipkin. "Go and get him." Still, the strange rabbit made no move. The wind rose, and the long grass began to flutter and ripple in the dip between them. From behind, Blackberry said, "You wanted me, Hazel?" "I'm going over there to speak to that rabbit," he said. "I want you to come with me." "Can I come?" asked Pipkin. "No, Hollaroo. We don't want to frighten him. 3's too many." "Be careful," said Buckthorn as Hazel and Blackberry set off down the slope. "He may not be the only one." And at several points of the brook and narrow, not much wider than a rabbit's run, they jumped it and went up the opposite slope. "Just behave as we were back at home," said Hazel. "I don't want it how to be a trap. In any way we can always run." As they approached, the other rabbit kept still and watched them intently. When they come to see now, he was a big fellow, sleek and handsome. His spurs shined, and his claws and teeth were in perfect condition. Nevertheless, he could not seem aggressive. On the contrary, there was a curious, rather unnatural gentleness about the way in which he waited for them to come near. They stopped and looked at him from a little distance. "I don't think he's dangerous," whispered Blackberry. "I'll go up to him first if you like." "We'll both go," says Hazel. But at this moment, the other rabbit came toward them on his own accord. He and Hazel touched noses together, sniffing and questioning each other silently. The stranger had an unusual smell, but it was certainly not unpleasant. It gave Hazel an impression of good feeding, of health, and certain indulgence, as though the other came from some rich, prosperous country where he himself has never been. He had an air of an aristocrat, and he turned to gaze at Blackberry under his great brown eyes. Hazel began to see himself as a ragged wanderer, a leader of a gang of vagabonds. He was not meant to be the first to speak, but something in the other's silence compelled him. "We've come over the heather," he said. The other rabbit made no reply, and his look was not that of an enemy. His demeanor was kind of a melancholy, melancholy.
Yeah, melancholy.
Yeah, which was perplexing. Do you live here? Asked Hazel after a pause. Yes, replied the other rabbit, and then add, we saw you come. We meant to live here too, said Hazel firmly. The other rabbit showed no concern. He paused and then answered, why not? We suppose you would, but I don't think there's enough of you, are there, to live very comfortably on your own. Hazel felt puzzled. Apparently the stranger was not worried about the news they meant to stay. How big was his warren? Where is it? How many rabbits was concealed in the copse watching them now? Would they be attacked? The stranger's manner told nothing. He seemed detached, almost bored, but perfectly friendly. His lassitude, his great size, and beautiful, well-groomed appearance, and his unharried air of having all he wanted and being unaffected by the newcomers one way or another. All these presented Hazel with a problem unlike anything he ever had to deal with before. If this is some sort of trick, he had no idea what it might be. He decided for himself at any rate it would be perfectly candid and plain. Well, there's enough of us to protect ourselves, he said. We don't want to make enemies. But if we meet with you in any kind of interference, the other interrupted smoothly, don't get upset. You're all very welcome. And if you're going back now, I'll come over with you, that is, unless you have any objections. He set off down the slope, and Hazel and Blackberry, after looking at each other for a moment, caught up with him and went beside him as he moved easily without haste and showed less caution than they were crossing in the field. Hazel was more mystified than ever. The other rabbit evidently had no fear that they set upon him, hired to one, and kill him. He was ready to go alone among a crowd of suspicious strangers. But what he stood to gain from this risk is impossible to guess. Perhaps, thought Hazel wearily, teeth and claws made no impression on the great firm body and shining pelt. When they reached the ditch, all the other rabbits were squatting together, watching their approach. Hazel stopped in front of them, but didn't know what to say. If the stranger had not been there, he would have given them an account of what happened. If Blackberry and him was driven the stranger across the field by force, he would have handed him over for safekeeping to Bigwig or Silver. But they have him sitting beside him, looking his followers over in silence and courteously waiting for someone else to speak. This situation's beyond Hazel's experience. It was Bigwig, straightforward and blunt as always, who broke the tension. Who is this, Hazel? He said. Why has he come back with you? I don't know, answered Hazel, trying to look frank and feeling foolish. He came on his own accord. Well, we better ask him then, said Bigwig with something of like a sneer. He came close to the stranger and sniffed, as Hazel had done. He too, evidently affected by the particular smell of prosperity. For he paused, and though uncertainly, then with a rough, abrupt air, he says, Who are you? What do you want? My name